Yes. So pericarditis caused the glomerulonephritis, which is the kidney failure. So because my lungs were no longer absorbing oxygen properly, it caused my heart to work harder, and then that caused my kidneys to fail. So my final diagnosis is type 3 lupus, which means lupus induced from an allergic reaction from an immunization.
Tamara Ugolini here with Rebel News to bring you a horrible story of vaccine injury that has completely devastated a once young and healthy man's life. Andrew Ritzman is a resident of Ontario where novel COVID-19 injections were mandated and, of course, pushed heavily by Premier Doug Ford's government through a coercive vaccine passport system. Ford's chief health advisor, the provincial medical officer of health, Dr. Kieran Moore, advised that spaces restricted to only those doubly vaccinated would be safer. And then he tried to backpedal and say that the government never intended their policy framework to be an indiscriminate mandate. But his rhetoric undoubtedly fanned the flames of medical apartheid in the province.
The vast majority of those cases and hospitalized in ICU are in unvaccinated individuals. So it's continuing to be a pandemic of unvaccinated people. Any business can introduce an immunization policy for their business and for their employees. And in certain circumstances in Ontario, we have mandated that as a letter of instruction. And we did not have a mandate in Ontario from this government's vantage point. Just looking at the population that has the least protection right now, it's the 20 to 39-year-old population. They have the highest rate of infection. They have still are getting hospitalized as a result of infection and a lower rate of immunization. I think that age group that likes to go out, that is naturally social, that takes advantage of bars, restaurants, nightclubs, I think once it clicks in the coming days that you must be vaccinated to get inside, that will change behaviors.
This comes as no surprise if you consider that Dr. Moore has a self-declared conflict of interest with pharma oligarch Pfizer. He says so himself here.
Have an honoraria from the Ontario College, and I'm on the advisory board of Pfizer for their Lyme disease North American strategy.
So after he mandated vaccination to change behaviors through essentially peer pressure, it's no surprise that my guest took his shot out of a societal burden. So after Dr. Moore mandated vaccination to, change behaviors, it's predictable that today's guest took his first Pfizer shot out of a societal burden and not a medical necessity. Just 12 days afterwards, he began showing signs of kidney failure, experiencing extreme pain and swelling in his extremities, making it painful to walk, and further causing heart and lung issues that ultimately made him unable to perform everyday, mundane tasks like climbing a ladder at his workplace where he was an electrical supervisor. Here is Andrew Ritzman's story.
My family doctor, I booked an appointment about 3 weeks after I got my shot. I had a recommendation from an NICU nurse from London Hospital that I needed to go get checked out because she saw my legs, how swollen they were. Then I booked an appointment with my family doctor, and I got a recommendation for a rheumatologist. And that would have been one of the doctors that I sent to you, Dr. Suhail. When I called him and tried to book an appointment, he refused to see me in person because the mandates said that everything was virtual. And he pretty much more or less called me crazy. And I just remember begging him, I promise you, if you see me, you'll see how sick I am. It's not usual for me to take off work. I'm very career driven, so to speak. It really started to affect me at my work. And then when it came around time to my birthday, I got laid off on my birthday. But when you're a unionized electrician, we cost a lot of money. If you're not making the company money, you gotta go. That's just how it is. And then I had been in the hospital a few times from October, December a few times, and then January. And then I started going into long-term care at Grand River Hospital, and I was finally taken serious. But I had to undergo chemotherapy for my kidneys. It was very bad. Like, so the average person has 0.15 to 0.25 grams of protein in a 24-hour collection, and I had 9 grams at the age of 29. That's not that's not normal.
So essentially, is it fair to say that your kidneys were failing?
Yes, I was at the point I needed a transplant, more or less, but I'm not eligible for a transplant, ironically enough.
Because you haven't received, after this entire unfolding, you didn't receive your second dose. And so, in order to be eligible for the transplant, you have had to have received at least 2 doses.
Even though I have a medical exemption, still not eligible.
Right. And you shared that medical exemption with me, and it's a time limited exemption because, in addition to all of these other symptoms that you are also having, your medical exemption, the time limited one, details that you also suffered from pericarditis, which is fluid around the heart. So, this is just another setback in your health woes, compounding this situation.
Yes. So pericarditis caused the glomerulonephritis, which is the kidney failure. So because my lungs were no longer absorbing oxygen properly, it caused my heart to work harder, and then that caused my kidneys to fail. So my final diagnosis is type 3 lupus, which means lupus induced from an allergic reaction from an immunization.
And now your medical exemption's expired. So what's next here?
I did have a letter written indefinitely from the immunologist, but the immunologist refuses to see me or acknowledge that the type 3 lupus is caused from the shot, even though my hospital reports say it. She refuses to see me, refused to advise me on what the best course of action was, so I've had to take it in my own hands and do it.
Well, and I guess that kind of leads me into the next question, which is, has anyone other than this immunologist been able to tell you why this shot affected you the way that it did and how to counteract it?
Not really. We're kind of in unknown territory. It's hard to say.
Right. Only time will tell, and we'll see when the experiment is sometime concluded. In terms of going through the vaccine injury support program, so there is that program instituted from the federal government. It's newly released and rolled out the last 2 years. You've been trying to go through that process. You've also been going through the process of having this adverse event following immunization formally documented. What has all of that process looked like?
It's been an absolute nightmare. I had to get to the regional manager of KW Health to get those forms finally. And when I showed up to hand them in person, the staff told me, "I've never seen these forms, you can leave." So I called the regional manager and I showed the employees the email I received from their boss's boss. And then they started to listen to me. They called her, and under her direction, she told them to send me on my way and said they didn't know who was supposed to accept the forms. So a week and a half later, she called her director, and then they figured out who was supposed to accept the forms.
Because I suppose in order to go through the VISP program, first and foremost, you have to have your adverse event following immunization records completed and approved.
To be taken seriously for the VISP? Yes.
And you're still in that process then?
Yes, they are not calling me back. They'll wait the full 6 months probably.
And the whole reason why VISP was brought out and rolled out was to help people who were struggling financially after suffering an adverse event. So what has that looked? What's your financial situation? How has that looked for you?
To be honest, I don't make enough every month to live. The only way I'm receiving money is through my union. IBW 804 is the only people who've had my back since day one. Even though everything was very uncertain at the time, they're still the ones who had my back. CPP claims I'm not sick enough to qualify for benefits, even though chronic kidney disease is one of the exceptions. There is no cure for kidney disease. I'm teetering at the point where you're sometimes considered for dialysis. It's as good as it's going to get at this point, and it will continue to get worse. So my type 3 lupus has actually turned technically into type 4, because type 3 lupus is generally very short-lived, but mine's permanent.
What would your message be for anybody who maybe is considering getting maybe the first 2 doses or even going for their booster, or anybody else who's struggling like you are to get answers and get help with all of this?
To anyone else who's struggling out there, I wish you all the best. I understand exactly what you're going through. I've had side effects from so many of the medications. At one point, I had seizures that were so violent, it broke both shoulders and dislocated them. I needed bilateral shoulder surgery for them. And that happened right in front of my 6-year-old son. So that was obviously very traumatic for him.
Andrew's disturbing story is not an anomaly. There are countless other Canadians who are suffering, many of them in silence, while they try to navigate the heavily bureaucratic VISP system put in place to supposedly help them. It's clear that vaccine mandates benefited many, either financially or politically, and Andrew's health and his son's mental health were seen as acceptable to jeopardize. And now Andrew, who was ignored by the medical establishment until he was nearly on his deathbed, can never work as a licensed electrician again because he is prone to seizures. All because he trusted the science. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. You can protect yourself from ambiguous and arbitrary liberal legislation that will block your access to Canadian news content by utilizing a virtual private network, also called a VPN. We've partnered with VPN provider Private Internet Access to ensure that you can continue to access all of our content across a broad range of platforms while also maintaining your privacy. Visit piavpn.com/Rebel News to take advantage of the 84% discount and 4 months free. Don't delay. Head over to piavpn.com/Rebel News to stay up to date on the news in Canada and protect your access to it.